talking about that, what are the different risks in DeFi and crypto? Because when we talk about insurance, as I mentioned, insurance is all about risk. Insurance is all about probabilities of something happening or not happening, the probability of uncertainties. And risks are the different uncertainties that we want to be looking out for. So the example of different risks in the DeFi space or in the crypto space. The first one is the DAO hack. So that's an example that it's always being brought up. During the 2018 period, where there were a lot of ICOs booming, there was this Ethereum DAO that was created. A lot of money was being put in there, and then someone found a hack. Someone took out a lot of money out of the DAO. So the DAO is a decentralized autonomous organization. People put money in. A hacker took a lot of money out, and this is where the Ethereum Classic came, because they had a hard fork, and people either stayed on Ethereum or moved to Ethereum Classic. So they're two different Ethereum chains. So this is example of a risk, because you could hack the hard-coded smart contract, or you could hack the system. The second is the Polkadot parity multi-sig freeze. Basically, the Polkadot is a layer 1 solution as well, like Ethereum, and they collected a lot of different funds, but there was an error in the code, there was a bug in the code, and the funds were frozen. That means basically the funds are lost, and that's a lot of money that's being lost, and there's nothing they could do about it because there was a bug in the code. The other one is the Yam Finance governance token rebase contract. So if you remember a few months ago, it's been so fast. A few months ago, there was this entire hype of the Yam token. What they're doing is to include YFI plus Ampleforth, putting it together. So you have a governance of YFI plus a rebasement of Ampleforth. Very interesting topic. You should check it out. And they put them together to create this Yam token. So everything went well, and then they realized, oh no, there's an issue with the governance contract. They tried to get the community together to fix it, but it could not be fixed. So that's it. That was a lot of funds were taken out of Yam. And although Yam is now at version 3, it has a lot less value locked in than when it first started. But it's okay. It was all an experiment. It was a good experiment. But this is an example of a smart contract risk. Then we have liquidation in the Maker's Vault. So on Black Thursday in March 18th, a lot of value is being wiped out in the crypto market, in the DeFi market, in the traditional financial market. A lot of value is being wiped out, and one of the things is the Maker's Vault. When people are minting DAI, they put the collaterals into this thing called the CDP to be minting DAI. And during this period, because everyone has this thing called margin call, lots of transactions going on. It was very expensive to send any transactions through, and a lot of people had to replenish their vaults because the prices of all the assets dropped dramatically. And because they couldn't put in the transactions on time, their vaults are being auctioned out, and someone got a lot of money for very little DAI. So basically, this is not exactly a smart contract risk per se. It could be considered as, an external kind of like infrastructure risk problems or some sort of governance issues. But these are still risks available, or these are still risks on chain, right? On the crypto platform. And lastly, you have the BZX smart contract exploit, where this person or this hacker, it's not even a hacker, it's just this person exploited the smart contract to be getting a lot of money for very little money. So these are some risks available, and these are not, some of them can be bugs in the smart contract, some of them can be exploited through malicious hackers, some of them could be kind of the governance structure, some of them could be the different the external system that has issues. So there are a lot of different risks available, and these risks are going to continue growing because as we are starting to explore the place, and there's still very little regulation, in fact almost no regulation in the crypto space itself, then the risk is quite large. So in DeFi in general, what are we looking at? In DeFi, technology is a double-edged sword. On one hand, technology is really, really good, like blockchain, is very good at coordinating all these different participants, at finding new incentives to be incentivizing different behaviors and optimizing the community. So technology is really good at that. At the same time, technology exposes a lot of inefficiencies that we have. All the inefficiencies that I talked about in traditional finance or traditional insurance, it doesn't mean that we just slap on the blockchain and these inefficiencies will be gone. In fact, by putting all these old systems on new infrastructure, new technological stacks, we are increasing the inefficiency because it becomes so quick and efficient to be inefficient. As in, all these inefficiencies that we have, they're going to be executed at a much faster speed because that's what technology and digitization is. So what we want to do is, when we understand that the power technology brings is coordination, is incentives, is collaboration, how do we use all these different mechanisms in place to reduce the risk, to reduce the inefficiencies of the other edge of the sword? Right now, we're still very much in our early days. We're still exploring, experimenting, figuring out what are the right incentives, figuring out if these incentives work, figuring out how people react to different incentives. So we're still in a very early new days. It's quite a golden time to be alive. At the same time, because we're so early, it's very risky. It's risky because the system is a lot more unknown. If you look at the traditional financial market, no matter how unknown, no matter how much of a new product it is being created in the traditional financial world, it's not completely new. You can always still find references from different areas and you can kind of structure the pricing of risk some way, somehow. Yet in the DeFi space, a lot of things are completely new. A lot of things are very uncertain. And when you have too much uncertainty, you just can't price it. Remember, insurance is all about risk. Risk is all about uncertainties. And if something is way too uncertain, even the insurance companies are too risk averse to want to underwrite and take on this risk. That means it's so risky that even the insurance companies say that I'm not buying the risk from you because it's too risky, I'm not interested in that. Insurance companies are only interested to buy risk that is within their threshold of risk tolerance and they can make some money out of it. But if it's too risky, it's too dangerous, right? You could lose everything. And then what's the point of buying risk from someone if you're going to lose everything anyway? So at the end, what we could do right now is find out what is in the DeFi space or what is in the crypto space that it's a little bit more assuring, a little bit more secure, a little bit more concrete. And what's that? That is definitely the code, the underlying technological code or technological stack. Because at the very least, it is the thing that is coded in, that is black and white in the system. Because you could code the smart contract, you could define the smart contract, you could define the mathematical models, you could define the business logic in that code. And people are not able to change that. That's the whole point of immutability in DLT, right? And so with that code in place, with that black and white thing in place, with that structure in place, it's a lot easier to figure out the risk associated with that code. So with the code, you could look at things like there's a bug in the code, there is an error in the code, there is the business logic just doesn't flow in the code, and so there are different errors, and you could underwrite those errors because it's a little bit more structured, a little bit more obvious to be understanding the risks. So if we talk about moving the traditional insurance space to the digital platform, what is the main difference? What are the value add that we can bring? Firstly, it's a community first approach. You realize that everything in the crypto space, everything in the DeFi space is very much community focused. That means everything that is done for the community first. If the community doesn't have any adoption, there's no mass adoption, then this system just doesn't take off because the market, which is the community, decides that this adds zero economic value and I'm not using it. So we are shifting. It's a very good shift when we are moving all these systems to the blockchain platform because we're going to look at community first approach. So this is something like, a product market fit. You want to find product market fit first before you start building your beautiful pitch deck and realize that, the market actually doesn't want it. So the entire community first approach, especially in insurance, is how do you assess the different risks? How do you allocate the risk properly? How do you reward people who are willing to take on the risks? So these are community first approaches. The other thing is we're going to build something old in a new way. So something old is insurance. Insurance is a very old model. But we're going to build it on a new way because we're building it on a new technological stack. An example would be the oldest way of insurance. It goes back to a long time ago where we talk about farmers. Let's say I'm growing rice and someone else is growing corn. And in this community that we have a lot of different plots of land. Every farmer with a plot of land will put some money into this pot. And whenever one of the farms is destroyed because of bugs or because of fire or hurricane or because some person decide to light it on fire, then they can use the money from the pot to be helping and rebuilding that farm. So that's good, right? Because it's all peer-to-peer, it's distributed. That's the entire idea of insurance. And in general, that's good. And that's how insurance started. The problem is that when we're talking about, let's say, drought, a drought is not something where drought only happens in my little farm and it's okay with other people's farms. No, drought happens when it happens to everyone's farms. So not everyone wants to get a little piece of the amount of money in the pool, and there's not enough to go around, and there's not enough to save everyone. So they're not distributed enough. So this is where insurance companies come in and say, you know what? Let me be the one to buy your risk, and I will be diversifying my portfolio. So I'll be getting you insurance. I'll be giving you insurance for farmers. I'll go to the dairy farmers and give them insurance as well. I'll go to the government to give them insurance. I'll go to the schools to give them insurance. So you have different types of insurance pools. And you want to make sure that they're not cross-related. And that's how you can diversify your risk. So that's in general how it works, right? And what we could do, and these are intermediaries. Insurance companies are big intermediaries, and they aggregate the risk and they get a lot of money out of it. So what we want to do now is we want the same model of decentralized distributed insurance, but we don't want this middleman coming in to take up all the margins, to eat up a lot of these operational costs. So we could streamline that business logic. We could streamline that a little bit more with machines, with smart contracts. And that's where blockchain comes in, because blockchain could be the one doing that. And that is basically building something old in a very new way. And lastly, a big improvement would be, as I mentioned, there were like 30 to 40% of money just being lost in overheads. And one thing that could be done is that all these things can be codified, all these business logics can be codified, and we encode them in smart contracts. So this becomes a very big improvement because smart contracts, it's not going to take up 30 to 40% of your premiums. Maybe it's going to take out a couple of percent, maybe 10% maximum, with all the other management things going on around and the electricity to be running the codes. Then it gives us additional 20 to 30% to be redistributed it out to the entire community. And that's a very good thing. So let's talk a little bit more about the risk. I talked about it a bit just now, but let's talk a little bit more in depth. There are three types of risks in crypto systems: internal technical risk, external technical risks, and the economic incentive risk. The internal technical risk will be stuff like, things that can be covered. As I mentioned just now, the insurance space in DeFi world is still very new because there are a lot of things that we just have no idea how to write the risk, how to price the risk. However, internal technical risk is still possible to kind of codify and quantify. So there will be things like your smart contract and your code on solidity. Things like your different hacks available. How people hack the system. Because there's something that you can quantify and you can make a price to that risk. External technical risk is a bit more difficult. External technical risk is something a little bit more out of your control. They could still be written on code, technical, right? But it's a bit outside of the scope of your jurisdiction. Stuff like your governance attack, stuff like your Oracle failure. Things that are on-chain, but external to your primary ecosystem. So these are external technical risks. And the probability of them could be quite small as well because you've got so many different external risks. So how do you price them? What kind of risk is that? What's the probability of them happening? It's a lot of information to process. And we still have not figured that out yet. And lastly, which I think is very interesting because I would say this is one of the things that the company focuses on, which is the economics aspect of things, the design incentive of all these systems. So this is the economic incentive risks that's out there that has not been quantified yet. So things like how votes can be manipulated, things like your concentration of power, things like how does this economic incentive affect people's behaviors that affects the riskiness or the risk profile of someone else. So it's a long chain of different variables. It's quite difficult to quantify the risk and a lot of things to be considered. But this could be one of the next new area of exploration in the crypto insurance space, because this economic incentive or these economic systems or mechanisms are relatively new compared to everything else that's in DeFi or everything else that's in crypto. Because right now we are using tokens as a way of incentivization to be affecting people's behaviors to make a change, to be behaving differently. So if my incentive or my mechanism can affect people's behaviors to change, surely there's a risk to that. But how do I quantify that risk? That's still up for grabs. So I would say that right now what we're looking at is collecting a lot of data when we are experimenting with these different incentive mechanisms. And maybe a couple months or a year or two down the line, we have enough information to be pricing the different risk profiles of the different incentive models. Then we can probably start considering how to insure against all these economic design risks. And that would be a very, very interesting next step.